Soon volunteers were also arriving at the scene, and with the emergency services stretched, those that could help were actually allowed to join in. One of them was retired firefighter Lee Ielpi, who was desperately searching for his son, Jonathan.
I met up with many dads that were looking for their sons. Many sons looking for dads. I saw people from Squad 288. That's Jonathan's house. I saw them. They saw me. They raised their hands. They were somewhat excited. And I figured, great, here they are. And the only thing wrong is they put their heads down. So I went up to them and they said, did you find any of the guys? I said, no, none. You? No, none.
As well as retired firefighters, construction workers also descended on Ground Zero and offered to help. And so the searchers became an extraordinary mixture of professionals and volunteers, bonded by a common knowledge that somewhere beneath the surface lay their family and friends. The search for survivors continued into the night, but with the rescuers suffering from shock and exhaustion, it was essential they had some time to recover.
Best for you, it's best for the operation. If you go home, get your rest and come back in tomorrow morning at 0900. Thank you.
However, the prospect of going home without his firefighter son Jonathan was almost too much to bear for Lee Ielpi. He was aware that the whole family would be waiting for him, desperate for good news.
I knew by then the house was going to be full of everybody, and they're waiting for me to come home. And I didn't want to go home. Didn't want to, yeah. I could have stayed, but that wouldn't have been right. And plus I had to think about how I was going to work as the days progressed. So I figured, well, I have to go home. I want to get rest, and then be back in bright and early the next day, and then do the same thing. So getting home, I was right. The block was packed with cars, and everybody looked. The toughest part was the oldest boy, Andrew, was 10. Austin was 3, so it was still a little bit of a mystery what was happening. But having Andrew come out and just say, did you find him? Yeah, toughest part. And then seeing the wife and the brothers and sisters, stuff.
Some didn't go home at all. Shattered by the day's events, they slept wherever they were when they could stand no more. But the hope of finding survivors remained. It was the beginning of an epic search. In the days ahead, the rescuers would risk their lives entering the voids deep beneath Ground Zero. To the rubble pile, bucket brigades sifted through the debris, while others cut their way through the impenetrable mesh of concrete and steel, excavating their way down.
There's a void in that comes in here, comes in over there, and get in underneath here.
Where chasms and voids opened up, rescue teams were sent in to explore. It was believed that many of the 5,000 missing would be down there, some of them alive, and that they might be able to survive for up to 2 weeks. As they made their first tentative steps into the darkness below, they spray-painted their path downwards in case they were trapped in a fall. Even descending the first 20 to 30 feet was very dangerous, but it was a risk worth taking for Lee Ielpi, desperate to find his firefighter son, Jonathan.
We thought, well, we have a grace period here. We've got 2 weeks just to get into as many of these cracks and crevices and get down deep to find them. Going in, if you had to stop and sit down and think, you might worry that, man, this thing could come down any minute. So you just kept your mind active. You know, oh, look here, let's search here, let me see, should we move this, should we go that way? Because it might be easy to just say, holy, let's get out of here. You know, so you had to keep your mind focused. After
10 days searching, no one had been found alive since day one. During this time, firefighters who had lost their sons began to be called the Band of Dads and spent every day sifting through the debris. One of them was Lee Ielpi, whose last hopes that his firefighter son Jonathan might still be alive were finally ebbing away.
And I got up hoping and hoping. You know what I hoped? I hoped that Jonathan got off his rig that day, flagged the cab down, and said, "I'm afraid," and left. And he was far away, embarrassed to call. And if he would have called, I would have screamed and jumped and hugged him. But I know Jonathan. But no, it didn't take more than that first week for me to realize that this wasn't going to be good.
2 weeks into the search, it became clear that there could be no more survivors. This might have been expected to bring an end to the search. In fact, the opposite happened. There was a new intensity as searchers became ever more determined to find the remains of everyone who died and not leave them behind in the rubble. Going into the voids below Ground Zero became increasingly dangerous as clear-up operations continued above ground.
If we gotta start getting some shifting, the thing you need to look for is something that you can dive underneath and you're gonna be somewhat protected.
Like a huge beam.
Like this beam, dive in between the columns. As we're walking down, as we're working our way down, you wanna make sure that finally...
Retired firefighter Lee Ielpi was searching in the remains of one of the stairwells where he hoped to find the body of his son Jonathan.
I talked the chief I know into letting us go one last time because I just had this feeling. We went as far as we could. You walk, and then the collapse was here, so you'd walk, and then you had to get down and crawl a little bit, you know, and just look around and look around and look around. Nothing. So we went back to where we had to climb up to get to where the stairs were. We did another look. Whatever it was, we did another look. And then on the floor, on this rubble area over here, it was a wet spot. We both looked at each other and said, and then you look up, and there was an arm that was hanging down. So, great, we got somebody. It makes no difference the person's not alive. We've got somebody's mom there, somebody's sister there. Now we've got to get to that person. Couldn't get to her. I probably this close. Couldn't get to her. And there was no way to bring stuff down there. There's no way. And it wasn't the safest place in the world. I mean, it was a very bad place.
3 months on from 9/11, and Ground Zero was like a sacred site. Still only 265 of the estimated 3,500 missing had been identified. Memorial services like this gave comfort to families who still had no body to bury. One of those was Lee Ielpi, who still hoped that his son Jonathan would be recovered. Then, on the night of December the 11th, exactly 3 months after he began searching, he received an urgent call to go to Ground Zero.
11:30 at night, phone rang. A deputy chief by the name of Paul Farrell. He said, "Lee, it's Paul." He didn't have to say anything else. I mean, you're not going to call me at 11:30 at night, you know. I said, "Hi, Paul." He said, "Lee, we have John." I said, "Okay. Be right in."
When Lee arrived at Ground Zero, his fellow firefighters and rescue workers were waiting for him. They lined up to form a guard of honor.
The guys didn't want to look at me. But I knew, somebody would look, I'd give them a wave. I don't want them to feel bad because this is good. I'd give them a wave, and then they'd wave back and do a thumbs up and all this. On the side was a Stokes basket. It's a litter, right, with a flag over it. So I knew that was Jonathan, most likely. Paul, the chief in charge, came up to me and put his 2 hands on my shoulders and said, "Lee, he's all there," which was very important. I said, "Thanks, Paul." I went over to Jonathan. I wasn't about to unzip the bag. I mean, it was 3 months, right? But I did feel him from his toes to his head, just for my own satisfaction. We picked up Jonathan and we carried him up this the third row, which was now lined with guys on both sides. Put him in an ambulance and went with him to the morgue.
Jonathan was identified through his dental records. The recovery of his body meant Lee and his family could at last prepare for his funeral.